Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast where writers sit around drinking tasty beverages to talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. There may be rants and raves and opinions that do not agree but are lovingly delivered. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. I'm Jeannie Warner, and this is episode 221, a discussion of progress. I think everyone who wants to write has work in progress. At least one. I have 3 novels written, 1 screenplay half done, 2 more outlining, and don't get me started on my short story list. What I hope to do today with a new writing buddy is to talk about that process of getting things done. And I hope the discussion triggers something in you today to say, I could try that, or, yeah, thanks for kicking my ass to get me in motion again. Because everyone has a story, and whether it's your own personal life story or something else in your imagination, I think we need to get it out. So let's focus on getting out that first magnum opus. Joining me is Andrew Walsh, a new friend acquired through my hockey network. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my delight. You've technically been a writer for over 30 years in the world of computer science and business, right?
Yes, I've been a communicator in marketing. I've been a communicator with technical writing and just the whole gamut in the business world.
I love the word communicator because in a certain way, that's what all writers are. We are communicating with varying degrees of success, whatever is in our brain, so that somebody else can read our minds, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And my success in business has been a result of my communication skills. I mentioned marketing, I also mentioned technical writing, and there aren't a lot of people out there in business who can do both. And in fact, I got a marketing job over a friend of mine who is strictly a technical writer, and she recognized she's not. But I got the marketing job that she was looking for because I can straddle both fences, which then leads to the creativity world.
Well, and they both have clarity and precision of terms and communication. I've done a lot of technical writing, and I remember my first technical writing job. I'm like, what does it do next? And they came back to me, what do you think it should do? So there's some creative writing all the way back in the technical world too.
There is, and the funny thing about when I started as a technical writer, and we'll talk about how I moved into program management later, is I would get involved in early stages of design work for software in particular, and I would be looking at it from a syntactical point of view, a language point of view, that kind of logic that becomes embedded in you as you become a communicator and a writer. And I would point out flaws in the logic of their screens or what have you, which would surprise a lot of people. But that's a piece of that communication. We are communicating to the user, and you're not communicating this properly. You are bouncing to something that doesn't make sense. You should move these pieces. So there's that aspect as well.
I love that you mentioned that you did editing on other people's work too, which everybody has always done editing. You just don't realize it.
One of the things that I also learned as an editor, and I sort of knew this up front, is I would overwrite. If we were working on, for example, marketing newsletters or what have you, I would overwrite because it's easier to pull things out than is to try to figure out if you need to add something. So if my copy has to be 2,000 words, I would prefer that somebody gave me 3,000 rather than 1,500 because it's harder for me to pad based on what they've done. It's easier for me to say, okay, you're all over the place. Here's your focus and cut it down that way.
There was a famous American author that said, I'm sorry this letter was so long. I didn't have time to make it shorter.
Yes, exactly. And that's a lot of how I do is I just keep just going and going and going, and then I go back to it to say, okay, that's not necessary. That's stupid.
I, I'm with you. I used to be in computer operations and I moved into marketing, and I discovered there are many, I don't want to say it too negatively, but business majors that seem to be in love with infinitives and passive voice.
Yes,
You're laughing because it's real, right?
it is. That struggle is true.
I I don't think anybody should ever empower their users to blank.
No,
I
no,
think it should
especially
either do the thing or not do the thing.
especially when you're telling somebody these are the steps you need to do. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do that. You don't do step 3. maybe you should let the system do this. No, 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 no. Step three is
The
push this
system can
button.
help you to achieve your goals.
Exactly.
No, no, it can't. Well, you mentioned to me that you had a degree in English and physics, which puts you right up there with Randall Munro and people that can answer really cool questions of what if in a very
Yeah.
cogent fashion.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I run into that occasionally. I focus much more on the English side than I always have. My background in work, as I mentioned, program manager and project manager, was software development. And the way that I would put that is you're driving down the street and you see a bunch of people digging in a ditch, and there's one guy that's leaning on a shovel watching them. I'm that guy on the shovel watching them because I'm giving them the guidelines. Your hole is too big, it's too deep. Um, and the physics helped a little bit with that, but it was really the communication side where the physics really comes in is when I'm watching something, a movie or something, and I realize that this is completely bogus and could not ever happen. But that's really the only time it ever comes in. That and when I'm working around the house and a piece of wood falls on my head, I went, yeah, gravity.
I always wondered in some of these, I read in the 70s and 80s, they referred to, guns in space, but they called them slug throwers or something else. I'm like, I felt like nobody really talked well about recoil and zero G.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, there's a lot of things. And one of the things that I like to watch on, say, YouTube is there'll be an astronaut talking about films like Gravity or Interstellar or the one that they all hate, which is Armageddon.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to watch that. There are actually books out there written by physicists that cover things like the physics of superheroes or the physics of space operas or things like that. Um,
I love Thaddeus Howes as the answer man for, what
yeah.
if and what about and stronger and how do you measure these things?
Well, the one that glares from the 70s, the one that just shines out for all of us with a science background is Star Wars. And how long is a parsec? A parsec is not a measurement of time. It's a distance. But Lucas not having that background thought it sounded like it was a period of time. So,
Oh,
so
wait,
I'm
didn't you remember in Battlestar Galactica when the Cylon base was 5 microns away?
Yes, yes, yes. In fact, I just recently read something about their use of alternate terms like microns and yars instead of years and things like that. And that was partly done to make it very alien, so it
Yeah.
wasn't supposed to be our language. But yeah, then you've got these things that are like faux amis. They sound a little too close to things that are words that are actually used for something else.
And that's the joy of it. I want to throw, just in terms of the words that you get to pick out there as a writer, it's okay to make new words up.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Onomatopoeia.
This is the rate by which a system goes through a jump gate connecting two entangled protons many parsecs away.
Right, right. A really good one for that kind of stuff is Doctor Who. Doctor Who is just a blast to listen to the things that they make up that really don't exist.
Well, let me talk to you about your side jobs because you've
Okay.
done some writing. You said for some screenwriting, some
I've done some screen doctoring, script doctoring. When I started off, I wasn't looking to get into novels. My whole bend was I wanted to be a filmmaker, and it was something I didn't pursue for a couple of different reasons. One is I had a lot of friends who had gone to film school and were continuing to work as a lawyer. And I didn't feel like doing that. I wanted to actually make something of myself and give myself a stable, at least financial background. And I could work on this stuff on the side. But I had a lack of confidence to a certain degree because I had really great beginnings. I had really great endings, but it's always, and every writer I think faces is it's the middle part. And when you talk about scripts, it's the three-act structure typically, and it's always act two, which drags a film down or a story down. And I had a hard time figuring out how to conquer that. I did finally, in my 40s, go into certain classes that helped me. And if anybody's looking into going into script writing, I strongly recommend Robert McKee.
you're going to give me a link to them and we'll put it in the liner notes because that
Okay.
is gold to know these things.
Right. There are two screenwriting teacher gods out there. Um, One is Robert McKee, and the other one is Sid Field. I had to think about his name. I'm not as much of a fan of Sid Field, although he is considered the better of the two. But Robert McKee gave me the mechanics that I needed. And we talk about my being a program manager and things like that. I am not I don't remember the term you use, gardener. I am a planner. I do plan my work out. Whether it's a screenplay, whether it's a novel, whatever it is, I do plan it. And McKee gives you the three act structure and everything that has to go into it, including things like when you write your dialogue, there's always an undercurrent. They're saying this, but they're meaning this. And he really gets into that in an extraordinary way, which is why he's so popular. If you are a wannabe screenwriter, I strongly recommend the movie Adaptation with Nicolas Cage because it's based slightly on a real life attempt to adapt an unadaptable novel by a screenwriter named Charlie Kaufman, best known for things like the John Malkovich one, Inside John Malkovich, I think is what it's
I
called.
loved that movie.
Okay, well, Charlie Kaufman wrote that. He wrote several other things. I think he also wrote Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. He was nominated for Best Screenplay for Adaptation, and it's Nicolas Cage is playing Charlie Kaufman. And at one point, he goes to Robert McKee's class. So Robert McKee himself isn't in it. He's played by Brian Cox.
And we love Brian Cox.
But there's a lot of discussion in it about Robert McKee, and Robert McKee was really, really helpful. Another person that I discovered who's very helpful with that is a guy named Blake Snyder. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. But he wasn't a teacher, he was an actual screenwriter. And he wrote a book which is a must-have for screenwriters called Save the Cat. And Save the Cat, he goes through certain things that are a little like tropes. They're not quite tropes. They're more, these are the things that you will see in films, and this is how you need to handle these moments. Save the Cat in particular has to do with you have a hero who may be an anti-hero, but you've got to show something good in the person right up front, or nobody's going to like them through the entire film. So what they do is they run into a burning building, they save the cat.
Right.
And suddenly
Right.
suddenly they're really a human. They love cats, but they're out to screw your fellow man, right?
I had a friend who was writing a short story, and in there they were sort of a likable, but they stiffed the bartender.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
had to bring up in our, when we were talking about it in circle, I'm like, this made me hate him. I automatically assumed 20 crappy things about it because you put in there, and I actively wanted him to be the one that died at the end of the story. And he looked a little surprised.
Yeah.
It's sort of the opposite version of, we, for anybody
Exactly.
that watched the short series Chaos, I mean, when Zeus does something terrible, and I'm not even going to trigger anybody with it, it's like we all are like, yeah, I want season two because I want him to go down.
Exactly. Well, when hopefully we will talk a little bit about research, because that's a part of my process,
Well,
and
absolutely. Let's go.
I will talk about a character who became popular through movies, but if you read the book, I hated the books. But anyway, to finish up what we're talking about, so I did some script doctoring, and that helped me a great deal. So I was trying to get into filmmaking, trying to get into screenwriting. I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have the tools. I now have the tools. And now I'm at a part where the confidence doesn't matter to me. I don't care what anybody else thinks. So, but that's how I approach this novel too, is it started really as a film story. And then it became very clear to me that no, this needs to be a novel. It can be adapted, but this has to be a novel first. And that's how I got into that and got into novel writing.
It's interesting to go from screenwriting to novels because a lot of people go in a different direction saying, hey, I've written this and I don't know, maybe I should go back and turn it into a screenplay.
Well, I have a very cinematic mind, and one of the things I figured we would talk about is inspiration, because I'm curious as to other people's inspiration. Mine is a little odd, and I've yet to meet anybody that actually gets inspired the same way that I do.
Lay it on us.
I have to go back in time a little bit. My father was born in the 1920s.
Well, hold on a second. We didn't make the noise. Doodle-you, doodle-you, doodle-you. Okay, we're back in time. It's the 1920s.
Subject for your approval. My father was born in the 1920s. And in New York, grew up in New York. And when Fantasia came out, he was in his teens, and he went to see it because it was playing in New York. It was playing in very selective places. This is Walt Disney's Fantasia.
Yes.
And it literally changed his life. He had heard classical music, but he was really being raised on jazz at that time. And this is the first time he got to see classical music with all these visuals and all of that sort of stuff. And the very first thing he did after he saw the movie is he went out and bought a 78 RPM set of Nutcracker Suite. He didn't even have a player. Interestingly enough, I have that set in this very room. So he really got into classical music. So I was raised on classical music. I was raised on jazz. And I enjoyed classical music. I was the weird kid at school that liked classical music and jazz. And when I was about 5 years old, Fantasia came out in the theaters again. And that was at the time that Disney would release their films every generation, every 7 years.
Yeah.
So I saw it when I was 5. And the only thing I remember is how scary the last piece was, which was Night on Bald Mountain.
Yeah.
But when it came out again when I was about 12, we went to see it again. And we'd have to actually travel into the San Fernando Valley to see movies like that. But when I was 12, it changed my life. And what it did was it matched the visuals with the music. And I'd been listening to this music all my life already. And at one point, my brain started to do that. So I will listen to a piece of music, and I'm not just inspired by the tone, but there's actual pieces, actual cues in a piece of music where I visualize action going on, specific action, specific things occurring. And over this period of time, what has happened is I will have not thought of a story that I came up with 20 years ago. I'll hear a piece of music and my brain will create a scene for that thing I haven't thought of for 20 years that enhances the story and may even put it in a new direction, but it still fits.
You will
I have,
love that there's a few authors that have started publishing their soundtrack saying, hey, I was listening to this when I wrote this.
okay, okay.
I know that Carrie Vaughn does it, and I know I've seen it a couple others whose names are not jumping high to mind, but
Okay,
I mean, music is such a powerful thing that way
it
that
is.
I can see that, okay, I see the visual from that, or I see them
Right. And
in
that
my
led
screen.
into my wanting to be a filmmaker because I saw this visually. I have a cinematographer's mind. And the one thing that did come out of it is I am a soundtrack collector and I have thousands of soundtracks, but also classical music. So I let my dad cover the classical music and I listened to his, but I would then buy soundtracks, movie soundtracks. I got involved in the James Bond movies. In the 70s, so I bought all the John Barry soundtracks, got into John Williams and Star Wars and Superman, got into Jerry Goldsmith with Star Trek and Alien and Logan's Run and what have you.
Do you feel
Um,
that the music influences the tone in your writing?
it certainly influences the tone because it's not just the individual cues that occur and the beats that occur in the music, but it's also what is the tone of the music. So if it's something that's a comedy type thing, I'm not going to think of a funeral, obviously.
Right.
So that's a piece of it. So talking about the novel I'm working on, that was actually inspired by a piece of music. It was the end theme to, believe it or not, even though I'm about to contradict myself here. It was the end credit music to a computer animated feature motion picture. And end credit music is usually like a little suite. The composer will take what they wrote, different themes throughout the film, and put it together in one long string. So it replays the themes that you heard through the film. And I was actually walking through the neighborhood, listening on an iPod, listening to this soundtrack, and I get to this end credits piece, and for some reason, it all clicked in. And by the time I got home, I got that it was a mystery. I got that it was humorous. I got the main character. I got his ethnicity. I had his name. I had his nickname. I had his best friend. I had his best friend's occupation. I had the city that it took place in, and I had what the actual mystery was.
Nice.
And the music has nothing, absolutely nothing to do. It's not even a mystery. It's a kid's movie. I don't understand it myself.
I like it. So, I mean, I kind of come to it in different ways sometimes of like the last mystery that was in my head was because I was sleeping and maybe I had seen Knives Out and Glass Onion recently, but my
Mhm.
my dream was a dinner party, and then somebody was dead. It was like we were all talking about her, and then in my dream, and I didn't write this story, so the world can steal it if they want. It turned out that the guy who was throwing the thing was actually a skydiving instructor that got the wife killed on purpose because he had a crush on her husband.
Yeah, and dreaming is an important thing. And I think the more you are a creative person, the more you are a writer, then you do end up dreaming scenarios. And I've talked to several people who aren't writers or are creative in any way, and they just have strange dreams, but they don't put it together as a story. I think we as writers, we do that. We wake up and we go, can I use any part of that?
Exactly. I mean, some of the genius that we love about all of the cozy mysteries. I mean, from the Agatha Christie's to Katie Murphy's Dublin Driver mysteries. All of these that are ideas of like, I know it happens in the beginning and I know it happens in the end, but there's a lot of conversations. And there's a argument in the movie industry right now of what moves the plot forward. And Christopher Nolan said it was, explosions and chase scenes. And yet I'm old enough to love it from the old adventure movies when it was absolutely the interpersonal conversations that moved the movie along.
I'm a huge fan of Alfred Hitchcock,
Very.
and ever since I was a kid, and he would talk about creating these things, and he came up with the term the MacGuffin. And some people know this, some people don't, and it has to do with a joke which I don't remember because the joke doesn't make much sense to me. About two guys on a train, and one of them has a valise, and inside the valise there's a MacGuffin, and you never find out what the MacGuffin is. For him, that was a plot point, but unlike, say, Nolan, it didn't drive the plot forward because he said it could be anything. The MacGuffin is what everybody's chasing, but it isn't the MacGuffin, it's the chase.
Yes.
And he talks about making a film, I think it was Notorious, with Claude Rains was the villain, Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant. And I haven't seen this one in a long time, but it turns out that, spoiler alert, turns out that it all has to do with diamonds being smuggled in wine bottles. No, it wasn't diamonds. It was uranium. That's what it was. And that's what got him into trouble because this was before the atom bomb. And he got a call from the FBI saying, why did you choose uranium? And he said it could have been anything. And that's where diamonds comes in. It could have been he was smuggling diamonds for the Nazis, but he was instead, I chose uranium. He goes, it didn't matter what was in the bottle. It didn't matter. That was the MacGuffin. What was important was Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman and the jealousy of Claude Rains.
Yeah.
That's what drove it forward.
Yeah, that's the what is driving your story out there. So, and then the next question I had is you mentioned in passing that you were asked to make your book a series. So how do
Yeah.
you figure out your series then? Is it a series
Yeah.
of
So,
MacGuffins
so,
or?
right. So what happened was I ran into a publisher. He's semi-retired, and we struck up a conversation. And at that point, I had just simply asked, so if somebody had a manuscript and they wanted to make sure that they submitted it and wasn't just rejected out of hand, what's the secret to that? And he said, a lot of it's networking. So get to know publishers. That's the one thing I got out of that. But his eyes lit up and he said, do you have something? And they said, well, I've been working on this thing for a while. I abandoned it because of family issues and work issues and whatnot. But it's there, hanging in there. And he had two questions, two main questions. Well, I had three. One was, can it be done by May? And I said, no. But he said, is it serious or is it eerie? I don't remember the term he used. And I said, no, it's humorous. He goes, oh, thank goodness. I go, why? He goes, we're getting right now are these really eerie things. They were calling it the Swedish syndrome because of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Wallander and The Phantom and those kinds of books. And I said, no, it's humorous. He goes, oh, good, good, good. He goes, is it a series? So that was the second thing. And my reply was, it's not, but it could be, because it turns out with mysteries, the series is the thing. your character in different situations from book to book. You talked about Agatha Christie. Well, you've got Hercule Poirot, you've got Miss Marple. With Dorothy L. Sayers, you've got Lord Peter Wimsey. Today, you have people like, when we talked about research, I'll mention Robert B. Parker and the Spencer series, the Jesse Stone series.
I will
And
also throw out that there is a brilliant movie out there, if you like all those, called Murder by Death.
oh,
And
yes.
Neil Simon took all of these characters and brought them, all of the different writers' main characters together to solve a mystery of the death of the host.
Right. Except if it was a spoof. So
And
it
it's
helps.
brilliant, and
Yeah, it
y'all
is.
have to go watch it immediately. I think you can actually see it now on a couple streaming channels.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, the thing that shocked me about that, because I do have a copy of that on DVD, the thing that shocked me about that is who wrote it. Very much not his normal style. It was Neil Simon.
It is, but I don't know. I called it. Neil Simon was one of my favorite playwrights for a long time.
Well, if you look at his plays, and this is one of my complaints about him, is he tended to write two-person scenes. There's not a lot of three or four-person scenes in his work. It's usually two-person scenes. It's Felix and Oscar, or, husband and wife, or whoever. But straight spoof like this, just making fun of these other characters and being very slapsticky and all these puns, that's not what he normally wrote for stage. He was much more cerebral, I think, on stage. But this goes back to his Sid Caesar days. He started with Sid Caesar's show of shows. He worked with Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, Woody Allen, his own brother. They were all in the writer's room together learning this stuff. He went on to be a great playwright. And then, of course, we know about Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner, what have you. So Murder by Death is like going back to his roots. And that's one of the reasons I really like about that is here you have a writer who has a sort of established pattern, say on stage, but he can change himself and do something completely different from what people expect. And I like that a lot.
I do too. And so you're clearly a planner, a
Hmm.
plotter, as opposed to we've decided we don't like the term pantser. We are like
Right.
your
I
organic
heard that.
growth is a little bit more universal. So,
Yeah, I met Ray Bradbury a couple of times because he was very, very approachable at anything that he showed up to. You could walk up and talk to him. And I even talked to him a little bit about this. I loved his prose, absolutely loved. I think he was one of the best wordsmiths ever. But I hated his stories.
hmm,
The short stories were okay, but when you get to the novels, I had a problem. And he fully admitted what I suspected is he didn't plan, and he never went back to edit his own work.
interesting.
He would say, I'm just as excited to see how this ends as the rest of you, because he just sit down and start just free flow writing. Where this comes into a problem is I was reading Fahrenheit 451 and hearing how great a novel this was. And this is one of maybe three or four novels that once I got to the end, I wanted to throw it across the room in anger because about two-thirds or three-quarters of the way through, he realized that the plot he had for the main character, Montag, was not going to work. And so he takes a sudden turn into a totally different direction that there's no foreshadowing for. You had no idea it was going this way. And suddenly, and maybe that's closer to real life, but
Yeah,
that's not what writing is.
maybe.
Right?
Yeah.
You should be foreshadowing these things. Suddenly out of the blue, it's like, what? Who are these people? What's this going? What? What? Because he would never plan and he would never go back. Whereas here I am writing a mystery. I have to plan this. I have to give you the clues. I have to give you false clues. I have to give you red herrings. So I have to plot this out just because it's a
Part of the reason I've enjoyed some of the modern mysteries is I was a big Nero Wolf reader for years and
Mhm.
and some of the others, but I started the end. I liked the guy who took over for Nero Wolf, writing New Nero Wolf, more than I liked some of the original ones.
That's true. That's true. Well, since you mentioned Nero Wolf, let me talk about my research since I'm a planner and it just fits right in with that
I
anyway.
love research.
All right. You mentioned something, and I want to, in one of your earlier podcasts, and I want to bounce off of that. Actually, it wasn't you who mentioned it, it was one of the writers. You asked, for newbies, what would you recommend? And one of the things that he said was read the works by other authors in your genre. And I agree with that, but I want to add to that. When you read those, take notes. Take notes of what you liked and what you think worked, but in particular, take notes of what didn't work. Because obviously no writer is perfect. And if you do a series, you start to see some of these cracks. So I mentioned Ray Bradbury never went back to edit. And for me, that caused problems in some of his longer novels. So I started to do research and I read mysteries in general, and there were certain people that I really liked. Obviously, Agatha Christie, but you don't do Agatha Christie's these days. It's not the world for that anymore.
Yeah.
But I read people like James Patterson. I do not like James Patterson. I know he's popular, but one of my biggest problems with him is I think he is a frustrated screenwriter because if you look at one of his mysteries, he changes chapters every change of location. And that just nags me. So in a 250-page novel, you've got 80, 90 chapters. That's way too much. There's got to
Yeah.
be there's got to be a better way than doing that. So these are the things where like, okay, no, how am I going to then create my chapters which aren't like that? So I'm creating my chapters more around what's the theme that's going on during this period. So I started with, obviously it goes from the previous chapter, but where am I going to end the chapter when there's the right break? It's not location, it's a fact has come out, or there's been a twist, or something has happened that, now you have to go into a slightly different direction. That's how I look at my chapters, but that's a reaction to Patterson.
I can see that. I actually liked, it was yet another bit of advice that somebody else had, is there has to be something important revealed in any chapter. Now,
Yeah.
that important could be something that the character does that changes somebody's life, something that somebody else does that changes the character's, we'll say, investigation, some observable thing. Something has to be, if it's not, if you don't get anything new, is it a chapter yet?
Right, exactly, exactly. There's only one place where, in my case, when a new chapter starts, it usually is in a new location. But there are a couple of chapters which change location, and that's I think that's natural. There's only one chapter in the novel that I'm writing right now where the chapter break is, and the next chapter starts in the same location. And it's because a bombshell is dropped at the very end of one chapter. And the very first line of the next chapter is the main character saying, "Come again?"
Yeah, yeah. It's
It's
still,
like,
oh, it's, that's a mini cliffhanger. It's the same general idea.
exactly,
you have,
exactly.
you set up a place, a time, an interesting, you
Hmm.
said, it's okay because I think there's something I should tell you. You're
Exactly.
suddenly noticing that your podcaster is not casting a shadow on the wall. Like, what?
Yeah, and chapters, I also look at it as, is this a good place for the person to put the book down and go to sleep, or put the book down and go make dinner?
Exactly. I mean, for many of us, we only got one chapter every night when somebody was reading to us in our childhood. And
Yeah,
the whole point was to make you want to read the next chapter.
exactly. It's the Scheherazade thing with
Exactly.
right. What's going to happen next?
Yeah. Carol
Yeah,
Wolf writes a
right.
bunch, and she always talks about using tent poles. She says you have to design
Mm,
your main tent poles. Like here's, if it's a big top, you've got a big middle one and then two big side ones. But there's a
mm,
lot around the outside too. But what
mhm.
are the important moments that are pivotal and important to the narrator and therefore the story?
Right. You've got your plot, and then you've got your subplots.
Yeah.
And all of the characters somehow or other have to relate to these plots and subplots. So you could have your main character who is out trying to figure out who did this thing, but at the same time they're having problems at home, or they're having a clash with their best friend, or their car just won't work, or something like that. And that adds not only to the character, but it adds to the story. And it may become a pivotal moment where, oh my gosh, I'm being chased by the bad person. I get into the car, and of course it's not going to start. So you can weave those things in, and that's your tent poles, like you said, and the peripheral things around it.
So tell me, I would often say, what's your advice to newcomers at this point? But because you've kind of given that.
Well, I was going to mention some more stuff about the research. So I mentioned earlier that there was somebody I hated. I liked the movies, I hated the book because I switched away from people like Patterson and I thought, okay, I'm being humorous here, so I got to look at mysteries that have that sense of humor. So one of the very first ones I looked at was Fletch. If you like the movies, don't read the books because he's not a nice guy in the books. He's a real jerk. And that was book number two I wanted to throw across the room when I finished it, was the first Fletch book, because I hated him so much. And that goes into what you were saying about, we were talking about earlier about saving the cat and making even this dislikable character likable. You have to want to have something with this character. And in the case of Fletch, you want him to do the right thing, and he doesn't. He never does. So I learned about character from him. But then I started looking at, for example, Robert B. Parker. And Robert B. Parker is best known for The Spencer. And if you've only seen the Spencer TV show with Robert Urich, they're very different from the books. The books are written first person, and the humor derives from the character Spencer and his girlfriend and his best friend, and the humor around there. The mysteries are very, very serious, and they're usually murder, but he's got this sense of humor and this sense of self-irony. And I thought, okay, I really like that, and I was drawing from that, in that I'm dealing with, I mentioned to you earlier, I'm dealing with a tightrope when it comes to this particular story because it's humorous, but again, it's a very serious subject. It's a missing person who's very important to the main character. And he's not a detective. He's thrown into this. Can you find this person for us? Can you help us find this person? And the tightrope is, this person could be dead. They could be locked away somewhere. They could have been abused, whatever. He's trying to find this person, yet it's his personality and his friends that give it the humor and the witticism. So it's humorous to watch him stumble and fall, yet the end goal is extremely serious.
Yeah.
And you see that in Parker. And you mentioned Rex Stout. Nero Wolfe is the pinnacle for me of those. I find very little wrong with those. And for those who've never read the Nero Wolfes, I heartily recommend them. They're first person, written by his leg man. Nero Wolfe is too fat. He's 350, 400 pounds to leave his brownstone in New York. So it's all written first person from his assistant, who's also a licensed detective, Archie Goodwin, who goes out there and does the work, but he's not a good enough detective to figure it out. That's where Nero Wolfe comes in. And the humor comes from Goodwin's personality and how he's viewing these things.
Yeah, I like it.
Right. So with Parker though, Parker I think it was also he's since passed away. Parker I think was also a a wannabe screenwriter because you read his books and it's very dialogue heavy. It's very snappy and short and dialogue heavy. And the problem I found with him, there's two things that I'm trying to avoid. One is no matter what the story starts off, if it's a kidnapping, it ends up with murder. If it's extortion, it ends up with murder. If it's a bank robbery, it ends up with murder. They don't all have to be murders. Half of the Sherlock Holmes were not murders. Right? A lot of the Hercule Poirot short stories were not murder. The other thing that bothered me the most, though, and this is where the script writing thing comes in with the heavy dialogue, I think he adhered to the Elmore Leonard 10 rules a little too closely. And I think everybody knows about the Elmore Leonard rules.
Yeah, we've mentioned them before.
Okay. Well, one of them is get rid of respond, get rid of answered, get rid of that. Only use the word said.
Said, yeah.
I have a problem with that because it becomes repetitious, especially in the case of Parker, because every line he used said, and it's over and over and over. You've mentioned Hemingway and not liking Hemingway, and I agree with you mostly. There's a couple of Hemingways I really like.
We're good with mostly. I mean, absolutes are hard.
Right. Well, he did one of the things that I think was his strengths was the dialogue thing because he eschewed said. If there's a line of dialogue, he just figures you're going to keep up and you know who's saying what. And I think that's the right way to do it. Unless there's three people in the room, then you got a problem. But if it's two people, Parker continued to use said. And I thought there's got to be other ways to do that.
Yeah.
Hemingway, by the way, you were talking about, I'm sorry, I'm going way off on tangent here. You mentioned, I think you're talking about he was wet, she was wet,
And they
the
were wet
rain.
together in the rain, and it was a good rain. Yes, that's
Right. Do you know why Hemingway wrote that way?
it was most in particular the one story, and I presumed it was a certain, to me, I considered it an over focused mental challenge of his individually.
Well, it turns out, because I did some research into Hemingway when I was in college, getting my English degree, and I discovered something that opened up the skies for me when it came to Hemingway. It turns out he was an atrocious speller.
That would make my mother so happy, who is an atrocious speller. Sorry, Mom.
Right. That's why he wrote short words, short sentences, and that snippy style was because he wrote only words he knew how to spell.
Right.
So he didn't become verbose, and it became his style. So maybe one day he finally bought a dictionary, whatever it is. He just continued with that style because it was like, Bob Ross painting happy little trees hated his hairdo, but everybody knew him by the hairdo, so he had to keep it for the rest of his life.
Yeah, by the way, I'm going to need the link to Hemingway couldn't spell because I might have to have it put on a t-shirt, you know.
Hmm.
But again, this is for anybody out there. If your spelling is not your strong suit, one, there is spelling corrections and dictionaries in the world, and two, if somebody that famous couldn't spell well, that doesn't mean you can't write too.
Absolutely. We are all constrained by certain talents that we have, our strengths. As a project manager, I always learn to play to my people's strengths. And it's the same with ourselves. We play to our strengths. We can work on our weaknesses, but if we know we're really good at one particular thing, then play into that. Absolutely, leverage that as much as you can.
Absolutely. Well, Andrew, I'm going to need you to send me a whole bunch of links of some of the things we talked about of your favorite places, and I will list mine out on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for allowing me to. This was helpful to me as well because it allowed me to express certain things that I had in my brain, which I really didn't talk that much about. And in a way, it's helped me say, yeah, I think I am going in the right direction. So I really thank you for this.
Oh, my delight. And hey, you out there, talk to your friends about your project. The more you talk about it, the more words will magically appear in your head. I swear to God, it's real. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web magic is cast by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer is Ksenia Chernievskia, with backup by David Welsh and John Schmidt. Our intro and exit music is performed by Michael Langberg, who lives down under in Australia and runs Tin Can Music School. Our podcast sponsors are Jackal Designs, The Bean Scene, Arm Street in Kharkiv, and wherever you like to take your notebook or laptop and just write. Hey, thanks so much for listening.